Hello, this is John Hesse, Cahokia Presbyterian Church. I'd like to read from Wise Words by Peter Lythart, and the story is The Monster's House. Once upon a time there was a land far, far away where all the people lived in terror of a great monster. This monster dwelt on a high mountain that was always covered with thick clouds. No one had seen the monster at any time. It was said at night the cloud would light up like a bonfire, and the monster would stalk the land, kidnapping anyone it found and carrying him away to its mountain home. Nearly every family had lost a father or a mother, a son or a daughter. Sometimes entire families would suddenly turn up missing, and everyone would know exactly what had happened without even saying it. Some said the monster was a great hairy man, taller than a tree, with one eye in the middle of his forehead, and another in the middle of his chest, and perhaps one on each knee. Others said it was a dragon with as many legs as a centipede, and 10 horns spouting from 3 heads. Still another believed that the monster could change shape at will, appearing now with the face of an ox, now with the face of an eagle or a lion, or even with the face of a man. But no one had ever really knew what the monster looked like, since no one had ever seen it. At least, no one who ever lived to tell about it. All the knights and warriors of the land had gone to battle the monster, but none ever returned. As soon as they touched the mountain, it seemed they were doomed. When search parties were sent to find them, they discovered no clues to tell them what had happened. In the end, there were no warriors left. Men who were less well-trained in the ways of war began to venture off, hoping to save the land from the monster and to make a name for themselves. Farmers, a woodcutter, some of the craftsmen from the surrounding villages, they all climbed the mountain. But like the warriors, they never came back. By a small stream that flowed at the foot of the mountain lived a man named Zeke with his wife and 4 children. Zeke knew of the monster, and he'd heard all the stories. He didn't believe in any of them. Besides, Zeke believed in living and letting live. As long as that monster left him and his family alone, Zeke never took time to think about it, much less go off adventuring to destroy the monster. That all changed one morning when Zeke awoke to find his house empty. His wife and children had been stolen quietly in the night. Then and there, Zeke resolved that come what may, he would do everything in his power to rescue them from the monster. That very night, he packed a bag with food and a bread knife, which was the closest thing to a weapon he could find, and started up the mountain. Above him, he saw the thick cloud glowing red and orange against the black night sky. It took most of the night to climb to the peak. At dawn, Zeke pulled himself up onto a plateau at the top of the mountain. Through swirling clouds, he saw an odd white building. Hiding as best as he could behind small bushes and gnarled mountain trees, he made his way toward the building, which he was certain was the monster's palace. A high wall encircled the courtyard of the palace, but Zeke was able to find a small opening to peek through. In the growing morning light, the house looked even stranger than it had in the shadows of dawn, like something from a half-remembered dream. Its size was enormous, almost too big to sit on a mountaintop, big enough, it seemed to Zeke, to fill the whole earth. The house was unfinished. Towers poked up here and there for no apparent reason, some stretching high into the sky, others seemingly abandoned shortly after they were begun. The wall varied in height, with large gaps all around. The house was made of pure white brick, but the bricks were like nothing Zeke had ever seen. They were of irregular shape and size, so that Zeke, though he knew something about buildings, could not understand how the house held together. It teetered back and forth, threatening each moment to collapse into a heap, yet supported by some unseen power. It never fell. More strangely than this, it seemed to Zeke, was that each brick of the house was in constant motion. At first, he was certain that the morning light and the misty clouds were playing tricks with his eyes. The more he looked, the more convinced Zeke became that each brick was alive and breathing. As Zeke stared in wonder at the house, the door opened and 5 figures stepped into the court. To his horror, Zeke recognized them as his wife and children. A 6th figure, shrouded in dark robes, followed them. When they reached the center of the yard, Zeke's wife and children stopped and turned to face the mysterious robed figure, who said something Zeke could not hear. From a large basin, the man in dark robes drew some water and poured it over Zeke's wife and children. Then the figure handed something to each and pointed toward a doorway. They disappeared and returned a few minutes later, wearing long robes as white as snow. The dark figure pulled a small golden pitcher from somewhere in the folds of his robe, and as Zeke's family knelt before him, he poured a thick, sparkling liquid on their heads. Zeke at first had been frightened, but now he was confused. They seemed to be going along with this. They must be enchanted, he thought grimly. If that was true, there was no hope, for Zeke knew that he was no match for a wizard. While these thoughts flooded his mind, Zeke's wife and children lay in narrow metal boxes, stretching out as if in coffins. When they were still, the robed figure walked to the far end of the court and grasped a knot of ropes. As he pulled the ropes, the metal boxes rose higher and higher into the air. Zeke saw the boxes hanging high over a huge, sharp rock. If they fall on that rock, they will be broken to pieces, Zeke said to himself. I've seen enough. Boldly pulling his bread knife from his pack, he climbed the wall. As he reached the top, the robed figure was about to let the boxes fall. Stop! Zeke shouted. Don't let them fall. You'll kill them. Suspended above the rock in their metal coffins, Zeke's wife and children sat up and looked. The robed figure spun around, surprised by Zeke's cry. As he turned, his hood fell back, revealing a head of white hair and a white beard framing a face bronzed by the sun. His eyes blazed at Zeke, but he began to lower the coffins to the ground. Stop! Zeke cried again as he leaped down into the courtyard. I'm come to rescue you. Let's go home, he cried to his family, before the monster finds us. By this time, the boxes were only a few feet above the ground, and Zeke's wife jumped out and threw herself into Zeke's arms. Zeke, she cried, I was hoping you would be summoned too. I'm so happy you were here. Summoned? Happy? What do you mean? I wasn't summoned. I came to rescue you, and you were kidnapped, weren't you? Oh no, she said, laughing. We came up the mountain freely. Ever since my friends came up, I've wanted to come. You remember Sarah and Rebecca, don't you? They're here too. As she said this, she waved her hand toward the east wall of the house. And for a moment, Zeke thought some of the white bricks looked oddly familiar. One seemed to smile kindly at him. Zeke shook his head and rubbed his eyes. Darling, you've been enchanted by this wizard here, and I'm becoming enchanted too. Come with me now while we still can. Let's go home. But I do not want to go home. And besides, I cannot go. I've been summoned, and so have our children. We cannot refuse after we've been summoned. This is our home now. The bearded man in dark robes had come close and now interrupted. Perhaps I can explain, he said. His voice resounded like a distant waterfall. Who are you, the monster's assistant? Where's the master of the house? Zeke brandished his bread knife. Threateningly in front of the old man's face. Don't come a step closer, he said, vainly hoping his voice would sound more fierce than fearful. In spite of himself, Zeke was fascinated by the old man, whose voice was like that of a dear friend whose memory Zeke had, for some awful reason, tried to erase from his mind. The old man's face softened into a smile. You are very mistaken. There is no response. There is no monster. I myself am the master of the house. Zeke sat down on the ground, his head spinning. Maybe you should explain, he said, still careful to keep the sharp end of the bread knife pointed toward the old man. I am the king of this land, the old man began. All the people are my subjects, although many do not know me. Others I choose and summon to my mountain, so that these at least will know their king. It is a great privilege, you see, to be summoned, a privilege I do not extend to all my subjects. Your wife and your children were summoned last night, and they have come to stay here forever. And although you did not know it, you also were summoned, and that is why you have come. But what if I do not want to be summoned? Suppose I like it where I am? To Zeke, the old man was more terrifying than any monster, although his voice and manner were gentle. It is as your wife said, if one is summoned, he comes. If one is summoned, he wants to come. Zeke thought a moment. What were you about to do to them when I climbed over the wall? It is part of the privilege of being on the mountain. Your wife and children, and you yourself, have been chosen to become part of my house. Once you are washed and dressed and anointed, you have to be shaped into bricks. My house is not quite finished, as you can see. I need a great many more bricks. Do you have to kill people to make them into bricks? Zeke asked. The old man's face became stern. For those who are summoned, death is but a passage to a life better than you can possibly imagine. They died that they might truly live. At first, the thought of being turned into a brick had made Zeke sick to his stomach. As the old man spoke, however, by some miracle, that same thought began to fill his heart with a joy he had never before known. What about the warriors who came up here to kill the monsters? Zeke asked, still trying to resist the attraction of the old king and his house of human bricks. By this time, though, he was using the bread knife to cut slices of bread for himself and his family. They found no monster, I'm afraid, the king said, still stern. They found only me. Some of them were summoned, and they are now bricks in my house. Some of them wanted only to kill and destroy, and those lie crushed beneath the great rock in the courtyard. Everyone who comes to the mountain faces one of two ends. Either he falls on the rock and becomes a brick in my house, or the rock falls on him and he is crushed to dust. There is no third choice. Zeke's wife and children looked at him expectantly. Well, he said finally. Well, what? Are you staying? Zeke shook his head and laughed, because there was nothing else to do but laugh. And it did not start as a joyful laugh, but when he stopped laughing, he was wildly happy. I do not seem to have any choice. I am staying one way or the other. And becoming a brick is a far sight better than becoming dust. While his wife and children looked on, the king led Zeke to the middle of the court, where he was washed, dressed in a robe of bright white, and anointed with golden oil. Then he lay down in one of the metal boxes. Before Zeke knew what had happened, his form had changed, and he and his wife and children had been fitted into a tower of the king's palace. Zeke has been a brick in the king's house for many centuries now. New people have been summoned, new bricks added each and every day. Yet even now the house is unfinished, and it will remain so until the end of time. The king's palace still looks as if it could collapse at any moment, but I, for one, will be very surprised if it ever does. And the moral is from Proverbs 20, verse 24. A man's steps are ordained by the Lord. How then can a man understand his way? Thank you very much.